Hi everyone, this is Casey, and welcome back to House Lorebridge. Today, I'd like to cover some more thoughts on A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, let's get into a topic that has had the Game of Thrones fandom community in an uproar. King Bran the Broken. Now, this video might get a little bit weird, but right now life's a little bit weird. Most of us are under lockdown right now, so let's explore some theories, even if they require a tinfoil hat and some red string. I don't have much, if any, truly solid evidence for my thoughts on this video, so just proceed with caution. At the end of Season 8, the fandom was in an uproar over King Bran, and I wasn't too happy about it myself. But, like Ramsay said, if we think this has a happy ending, we haven't been paying attention. In the show, it seemed to boil down to Jon, or perhaps Dany, ending up on the Iron Throne for most viewers. Now I'm going to put in my 2 cents about Daenerys Targaryen right here. Personally, I didn't ever really see Dany coming out on top of it all. I love her character, but the idea of having Queen Daenerys Targaryen never quite did it for me. There were even people holding out hope that we might get a sort of Disney-type happily ever after ending with Jon and Dany ruling together as king and queen. And maybe that could have been a possibility if the series was written by a different author. But instead, we got King Bran the Broken. Now, we all know by now that Martin supposedly gave HBO a basic outline of the ending of the series. And there have been many videos discussing possible hints throughout the main series that could be leading up to Bran coming out on top when everything is said and done. What I want to get into here is some clues that Bran could come out on top of whatever is left of the Seven Kingdoms. However, instead of referring to the main A Song of Ice and Fire series for this video, I'm going to be trying to pull some potential clues from the World of Ice and Fire history, as well as some parallels that have been made between Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire characters, mainly Jon and Bran, and the characters of Aragorn and Frodo from JRR Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. Additionally, while I was thinking about how to make King Bran make sense, I thought about how Martin has talked about his love of the Scouring of the Shire from The Lord of the Rings, and the idea that he is aiming for a bittersweet ending. Before we get too far into this, let's just briefly mention where we've left Bran and Jon in the books. At this point in the series, we only have the first 5 books, and at the end of Dance with Dragons, Bran is beyond the wall in the cave of the Three-Eyed Crow, also known as Bloodraven, and Jon has been murdered by some of his Night's Watch brothers. Now let's discuss some of the possible parallels between Jon and Bran and Aragorn and Frodo from The Lord of the Rings. Now there's a pretty strong argument to be made for Jon being a parallel of Aragorn and Bran being a parallel of Frodo. For example, Jon and Aragorn are both warriors, both are descended from ancient, powerful lines, and both grew up not really knowing who they were for at least a part of their lives. Bran and Frodo are both underestimated by those who see them as weak, if they see them at all, due to their lack of physical prowess. Remember, hobbits are treated as almost invisible to most of the inhabitants of Middle-earth due to their small size, and Bran is crippled and is seen in Westeros as being a fairly minimal physical threat. And both are from well-known families. But what if this isn't the case? Personally, I feel like these are just too obvious for the A Song of Ice and Fire books. It also doesn't take into consideration a seemingly minor character who actually ends up being a lot more important than we first think when we start these books. Sam. So, in my red string-filled mind, Jon is actually a parallel of Frodo, and I feel like Bran is a parallel of Aragorn. I do think that Jon will be the one to make the most physically and emotionally taxing sacrifices for the good of the world, and I think that especially given the way that he might be different after his resurrection, Jon will definitely need his Sam, who's currently in Old Town, to help guide him on his journey to save the world, just as Frodo needed his Sam to help him in the quest to destroy the One Ring. And Bran might not be a warrior in body, but he has powers that are arguably more dangerous than a sword if they're properly harnessed and mastered. Now, yeah, Jon can warg too, but Bran's powers are on a higher level than Jon's, and they will only continue to become more powerful due to Bloodraven's training. Also, of the two of them, I feel that Bran will be the least likely to fear the dead. As Aragorn was able to call on the dead of Dunharrow to fight alongside him as Isildur's heir, I think that Bran could be the one to call on the Stark kings in the crypts beneath Winterfell, as he is the presumptive male heir to House Stark. Remember, his claim comes before Jon, since Ned Stark was Jon's uncle and not his father. And lastly, let's think of the Scouring of the Shire. If the book story follows Season 8, the others will be defeated before the evil of men in King's Landing. So, just as Aragorn's main fight was with the evil of Sauron, I think that Bran's main moment will be with the others, and that's basically where we'll leave him. As Frodo and his friends had to deal with the havoc that Saruman had wrought on the Shire after dealing with the evil of Sauron, I think that Jon and his friends will have to deal with King's Landing after dealing with the evil of the others. So there we go. Jon is Frodo and Bran is Aragorn. Now let's keep that in mind, as this is how I've come to some of the conclusions that I have from the World of Ice and Fire book. In the World of Ice and Fire, we learn the known history of the land through the Maesters of Westeros. Now, since it's written from the point of view of the Maesters, it's a bit biased about a lot of things, especially when it comes to legend and magic, but this is really the best we've got. In it, among other things, we learn of all the historical figures of Westeros. There's one figure that sticks out to me as a possible parallel to Bran: Garth Greenhand. Garth Greenhand was the first High King of the Reach. Some say he was the first High King of the First Men. He is credited with teaching farming, and he was able to lead the First Men out of their hunter-gatherer lifestyles and into permanent settlements. Bran the Builder, who is well known as a part of the ancestry of House Stark, is also supposedly descended from Garth Greenhand. There are also tales surrounding him of blood sacrifice, and he planted the Oaken Seat, which was a living tree throne that the kings of the Reach used until it was later destroyed. Bran is also associated with using trees and presumably using blood sacrifice. It's also interesting to note that Garth Greenhand is associated with summer, which is also the name that Bran gives his direwolf after waking up from his coma with the help of the three-eyed crow. Aragorn was also a High King. His official title was the High King of the Reunited Kingdom. This title of the High King of the Reunited Kingdom could be another possible clue to the Aragorn-Bran parallel. Now, this one is a bit of a stretch even for me, since I'm not even 100% sold that there will be an official king as we know them by the end of the series, but I'll get to that in a moment. As much as I personally would love it, I don't think that Jon will be king. He's gone through so much pain in his life, and if we combine that with the betrayal and murder he went through at the hands of his Night's Watch brothers, I don't really think that he would have the desire to rule much of anything by the end of the story. As disappointed I was with the King Bran twist from Season 8, I did actually really love that Jon was able to go back beyond the wall, which seemed to give him some relief from the politics and infighting of Westeros. Much like Frodo going to Valinor, it's best for both of these characters to be able to leave the world behind so that they can finally find peace after years of struggle and pain. Now, a last bit that I have to say here is that while I see how Bran might come out on top at the end of the story, I don't know that it will necessarily be as a king. I especially have an issue with the part of Season 8 where the council elects Bran as king. I mean, Sansa asked for and was granted freedom for the North, but the Iron Islands, who have a long, long history of rebelling against the rule coming from King's Landing, and Dorne, who resisted joining the kingdoms united under Aegon the longest, didn't even make a peep. With the political turbulence of Westeros that will certainly only get worse before the story ends, I just don't see how there could possibly be much left of the single kingdom that was created by Aegon the Conqueror. However, as Bran is a student of Bloodraven, who is arguably one of the greatest masters of whispers that Westeros has ever seen, I do think that it's possible for Bran to become a kind of overseer or guardian of the land. I think that the kingdoms will go back to ruling themselves the way they did before Aegon Targaryen came around, and Bran will be a sort of otherworldly guardian whom everyone knows about and perhaps even obeys, rather than an official king. Thanks everyone for making it to the end of my red string and tinfoil hat rant. What parallels do you see between Martin and Tolkien's works, and how much of the tone of The Lord of the Rings do you think is echoed in A Song of Ice and Fire? Thanks so much for watching. See everybody later.